Someone Better by I_am_Ellie on AO3. Episode 26, Chapter 20. In Slow Motion. I feel like I'm going in slow motion, Shouta said. His legs were stretched out in front of him on the floor, flip-flops thrown to the side, and his leg break seemingly like a stark contrast against his skin, and the almost overwhelming white of the hospital. I feel like everything is going too fast and too slow, and there was no control in this situation. Everything was happening on its own without Shota's direct involvement to stop it from happening. And that was horrifying. It reminded him of when he was younger and with less wisdom that he had now, when he had watched the news at Hisashi's house, because Shota had not had a TV. And one villain after the other started stirring up things, or some other country made a threat, or someone big made a dumb mistake. And that tight feeling would spin up right in his chest because he couldn't do anything to stop this. He couldn't stop Hizashi from potentially losing his hearing. He couldn't stop Izuku from potentially dying. It was like the thing he had wanted was dangling in front of his face, and he couldn't muster up the strength or the energy to reach forward and grab it. Nemuri was sitting next to him, on the cold hospital hallway floor, because she was Nemuri, and Nemuri was always there. When Hizashi couldn't be, Nemuri was. I know what you mean, Nemuri said. Her dark purple hair was pulled up into a bun at the back of her head, left up so it wouldn't be a nuisance, and she looked exhausted. Shouta sometimes had trouble remembering that Nemuri cared about Hizashi just as much as Shouta did, just in a different way. It feels odd, Shouta said, and he had grown to dislike the word, but it was the only word suitable to describe how he felt. But familiar, like with Inko, Shouta nailed it, and with my parents, and the money issues, the meeting with Sho, the mission, his knee, his childhood days spent alone and tired and so hungry, trying to make his head stop bleeding, or trying not to scubble to a bully, putting in the hours and hours of work so he could be where he was today because that was something he could control. Shouta realized, detachedly, why this feeling, this hopelessness feeling felt so familiar. He had felt this way his entire life. Like with Oboro, Nemuri said. Shouta winced. A wave of guilt washed over him for the boy he had failed to save. Oboro. He had been dead for 3 years now, maybe 4. Shouta had tried not to think about him, had tried to forget about him. That hadn't worked, of course. Shouta hadn't been able to function correctly after the death of his friend, for weeks. It felt like there was this wall in between him and everything else, a fog settling over his mind and not welding, the world gray and lifeless. He had been reluctant to get close to anyone, reluctant to interact with anyone, even Hizashi and Nemuri, even though logically he knew that was just part of the job. People get hurt, people die, even people you care about. And Shouta had a lot of experience in people he cared about dying. Yes, Shouta said, voice terse and tinged with an exhaustion that seemed to weigh down his very bones. Like with Oboro. He wasn't sure how he would go on, should Izuku die. Oboro had been a friend, someone he'd known for less than 2 years, and he had fallen into a hole of guilt and depression following his death, to a point where even his teachers were worried about him. If he lost Izuku... He hadn't known Izuku very long. He had been in his life for less than a year. The child had annoyed him to no end on bad days, and at times he had mildly irritated him on good days. He had fits of crying and nightmares, and an unending curiosity that always managed to set Shota's hair on end. He had asked an unending onslaught of questions and quandaries, and, at the end of the day, His curiosity was still never satiated. No matter how many answers Shouta had given the boy, Izuku had come with debt and long hours and stress and exhaustion and an overwhelming, unending world of doubt that he wasn't doing something right, and that he was messing everything up because he had absolutely no idea what he was doing. But Izuku had also grown on him, had grown on him in a way that Shouta knew, should he lose that bright-eyed, tiny, annoyingly curious little boy, it would feel like something tearing into his flesh and ripping something out, leaving him scarred and incomplete and lost. If Shota's life was like patchwork quilted, then Izuku was the mostly oddly shaped, horribly cut, sloppy sloam patch of fabric on it. Looking upon it, it would be clear to most, if not all, that it didn't belong there. But it was there, and Shouta knew, should Izuku's uneven little patch of fabric be ripped away, the rest of the quilt would fall apart. Shouta needed Izuku to survive and ask him more questions and wake him up with his nightmares and to smile at him with that special little smile that made dimples appear on his cheeks that let Shouta know he had done right. Because Izuku was Shota's family, was the only blood family Shouta had left, and he loved him in ways that was hard to express and even harder to acknowledge, but felt right in a way when he thought about it. Izuku was there, and Shouta always wanted that little boy to be there, even if he had to fight tooth and nail to keep him, because Izuku was family, because Izuku felt just as necessary and just as important for him to go on in this life as his heart or his lungs or his brain, because Izuku didn't belong. He didn't belong on the patchwork quilt of Shota's life, didn't synchronize with all the other colors and all the other shapes. But Shouta knew that the quill would look better later on when he looked at the final project. But Shouta couldn't fight this, because control was just beyond his reach, and Shouta was going in slow motion. It doesn't quite make sense, Shouta noted. His voice felt stifled and still. He brought his leg up to his chest, wrapping his arm around it, though the other leg, the leg with the brace, he left outstretched. It would hurt too much to bend. Nemuri said, staring at the plain wall in front of them blankly. Izuku is alive right now, Shouta said. And if the infection is controlled, he will stay alive. If it does not, he could die. He felt like he should be concerned that there wasn't a lot of emotion behind his words. But right now, he was just tired. He is alive right now, even if he hasn't woken up, and I still feel like I'm mourning. I don't know why. For once, Nemuri didn't ambush him. I think I know what you mean, Nemuri said. And I wouldn't usually say this because it's ridiculously cheesy, and I'm like you, I'm not big on the idea that there's some all-powerful being controlling everything. It's hard to believe with the job we have. But Nemuri sighed. In situations like these, when all you have is an inkling of hope or faith or whatever, that things will be alright, that's important, I guess. I guess you're right, Shouta said. His knee was starting to ache more now, and Shouta thought it might be because he was sitting on the floor. He elected to ignore it. Hoping everything will be alright is good. Hope is good. I think. It is, Nemuri said. It was odd, in a way, having to choose to believe what your mind told you versus what the facts told you. His mind told them that Izuku would die, because his mind liked being cruel to him in moments like these. But facts told him that Izuku did have a chance of recovering, should the infection be stopped, and Shouta liked to think that he was naturally a factual person. He liked acting on logic, and it usually got him where he wanted to be. But there was a scale in all this. His heart was on the other side of the scale, and his mind on the other. And in this situation, his heart felt heavier. Shouta thought back on the last time he had seen Izuku. Little Izuku, who had been bawling his eyes out and holding onto Hisashi's leg for dear life. Not bye, child. See you later. Shouta wanted to laugh, even though it wasn't funny. Far from it. But he'd been tempting fate. He truly had taken so many moments for granted. Moments he thought he'd get more of. He thought he'd got to watch more movies with Hisashi and Izuku. Thought he'd get to watch Hisashi and Izuku cook in the kitchen while the child stole bites of ingredients. Thought he'd get to give Izuku one more hug. Tell Izuku that he was loved, that people cared about him. One more time. Thought he'd get to help him train more, in gymnastics and self-defense, and everything Shouta had learned as a child and more, because the child deserved better than the cards he had been dealt. The cards Shouta had been dealt. He shouldn't be wasting any more precious moments. He wouldn't. He would stay, and he would make time for his nephew, and he would teach Izuku to do backflips like the child had been nagging him to do for weeks, and he would give him as many hugs as he wanted, and for however long he wanted. He would never be reluctant to read the child just because he was tired, and he would be there. And he would try not to mess up. He would try, and he would try harder again and again and again every time he messed up, even if it killed him. I want to see Izuku, Shouta said suddenly, standing up. Nemuri remained seated on the floor. I can't go with you, she said. I'm not allowed in the room, since I'm not legally family. Keep Hisashi company, please, Shouta said, and Nemuri nodded, standing up and disappearing into Hisashi's hospital room. Shouta got into the elevator and pressed the button for the PICU. He was grateful his headache had actually relieved slightly from the painkillers he had taken, or else the beeping in the elevator and the constant noises from Izuku's hospital room might have killed him. Izuku looked the same he had earlier, too small in a too large hospital bed. The tube running out of his stomach, IVs and skinny arms, round face troubled from fever and pain even in his sleep, sweat dotting his forehead, strands of green curls sticking on his forehead. Shouta put on his mask and washed his hands, taking a seat next to the boy. I'm going to pretend you can hear me, and take this time to apologize, Shouta said. I shouldn't have taken that mission. I should have stayed and looked out for you once I found out you weren't feeling well, and I didn't. And I cannot begin to express how sorry I am. Izuku, of course, said nothing, though Shouta thought he saw the boy shift in his sleep. You're going to be in a lot of pain when you wake up, I suppose. The warning meant nothing, not when Izuku couldn't even hear him, but it felt important, somehow, to let the boy know. You'll be scared. It's very scary. There's a lot of tubes and loud machines, and you might be afraid of the nurses. But I'll be right here when you wake up. And if I'm not, I'll come running, just so you know. He shouldn't sound so awkward, so stilled. His voice, the way he talked, had always been the thing about himself that Shouta had been the most frustrated with. Not the social awareness, not his sensitivity to sounds or lights or smells, not his apparent oddness that had been such a horrible thing his father had left him and his mother had followed close behind. It was that he couldn't convey what he wanted to say. He knew what he felt, knew what he wanted to tell the boy in front of him, but couldn't find the words to do it. Words were always like that. Too awkward, too round, and too sharp. Too difficult to mold and shape into something cohesive. Sometimes, he wasn't sure why Nemuri and Hisashi put up with him. You were really sick, Shouta said. You had appendicitis. It means that this organ in your abdomen was infected, so the doctors had to take it out. Before they could, it burst in your belly, and now you have an infection. So you have to get rid of that. The doctors say you're a very strong child. And he was. God, he was. He and Izuku had gone through so many of the same things. The only difference was, Shouta had stopped smiling. Hadn't had much reason to, until he found Nemuri and Hisashi. Izuku never stopped. And that, truly, made all the difference. Izuku's head tilted to the side slightly, and Shouta thought he saw the boy's shoulders shake with a shudder. Child, Shouta asked, leaning forward in his chair. Child, are you awake? Izuku. Izuku's eyes blinked open, slowly at first, still foggy with sleep, before his face abruptly tensed up and his eyes became glassy. It didn't take much for his breathing to start picking up. Hurts. He whimpers, tears sliding down his face. I know, Shouta said. I know, I'm sorry. I know. He reached over, hitting the button to call the nurse. He thought it was important. It hurts, Izuku cried, and his crying only seemed to increase, shoulders whacking with sobs, but the movement only managed to pull at his stitches more, and that just made his pain 100 times worse. Izuku's head tilted to the side. Unky Sho. Yes, Shouta said. It's okay. Mask is scary, Izuku said, still sounding pain and breathless and horrible. I know, Shouta said. I'm sorry, I have to keep it on. It's to keep you safe, okay? So you don't get sicker. Hurts. I know, Shouta said. I know. The nurse walked in, swiftly checking Izuku's pulse and pressure before sticking a needle into his IV line and injecting something. Izuku relaxed slightly after that, slumping down into his pillow, tears still murmuring and running down his face. Because when Izuku started crying, it was hard for him to stop, but his body wasn't racking with sobs like it had been before. Better? Shouta asked, and Izuku nodded. Okay, are you tired? Do you want to go back to sleep? Do you need anything? Read me a story, Izuku mumbled. Sleepy. I don't have a book, Shouta said. Izuku whimpered lightly. Okay. He racked his brain. Sing me something, Izuku requested instead. This was usually Hisashi's department. What song? Princess and the Froggy. Okay. Shouta blinked, trying to remember any songs from that movie. They hardly ever watch it. In the Southland, there's a city, way down on the river, where the women are very pretty, and all the men deliver. Izuku frowned, and even tired and on painkillers, he still found the time to ask questions. What's that mean? Deliver. Like delivering packages and pies. Izuku nodded. Shouta continued singing, sang the song over and over again, even after Izuku's eyes slipped closed and his throat became sore because at least it was something to do. And Shouta felt like the world was less when he was doing something. Less loud, less cruel, less slow. Izuku was awake, and he didn't feel like he was in slow motion anymore. Alright, that was a hard one. My cat threw up today. This is the first time he threw up, and yeah, that was something. Anyways, I don't know why I talked about Storm throwing up. Moving on. This was a very emotional episode, clearly. Chapter. I could say episodes now. I can say episodes now. Woo! Actually, Storm is right behind me. Sorry, buddy. But it was a very emotional chapter, this one it was, obviously, clearly. I think we all know that Izuku doesn't die, or Hizashi. I'd like to say that. Major character death is not a tag. Do not worry. It is not a tag. Clearly they went through something traumatic, and, obviously Aizawa is looking into this and is, mourning. And we do get mentions of Oboro, right? But it's not like a huge thing. I think, quite literally, I kind of forgot that he gets mentioned at all in this fanfic. Only because we don't see him in the first couple chapters where it's like the flashback, right? So I sometimes forget that Oboro exists in this fanfiction. Which, do you blame me? I read this like about a year ago. I don't remember this completely. There's bits and pieces that I read. I'm like, oh, I kind of forgot that happened. That's actually kind of cool. So yeah, I love memory loss. It lets me rewatch a show and kind of experience it for the first time. But not really. It will never be the same, you know? It's like, oh yeah, that little moment. Oh my god, I remember now. Like, oh, or sometimes I don't remember, like, oh, well, that's cool. Oh my god, right? Or in this instance, Oboro, I completely forgot about him. I don't even remember him at all being mentioned even in this chapter. I completely forgot about him. I think maybe he gets mentioned one more time. I don't know. I don't remember him at all. And then there's obviously moments where it's like, oh, I remember now. And then there's moments like, oh, I don't remember this at all, but oh my god, this is so cool. And you get to truly experience it for the first time, but you never get to experience the whole thing for a first time. If you could experience one fan fiction for the first time ever, what fan fiction would it be for you? For me, it would be Deku, I Think He's a Pro by Clouds, My Head in the Clouds Not Coming Down. In fact, actually, it'd be any of my bookmarks. I would love to experience those for the except Before My Heart Gives Out. I actually don't want to experience that for the first time. Please, no, thank you. I experienced it once, never again. And if you don't have a fan fiction, then what's a show or a movie? Just state if it's a show or a movie or a fan fiction. So yeah, I would like to see what you guys would like to experience for the first time. Also, the whole thing that Aizawa was talking about, feeling in slow motion, feeling out of control. Humans, I would not, I'll try to see if I see Shouta exhibiting this behavior. Psychology corner here for a second. Humans, when out of control, try to resemble a sense of control. For example, technically speaking, Aizawa singing, right, and not stopping, his whole thing about he would rather do something because doing something makes the world feel less this, less that, less, right? That can be a form of taking back a little bit of control in a world and in a situation where you have 0 to no control. Anyways, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or a night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.